Well, good afternoon. Welcome to KTTC News Now. My name is Zach Fuller. I'm joined by Dr. Eric Shoars. Today we're going to be previewing tonight's gubernatorial debates. It is the second between Dr. Scott Jensen and current Governor Tim Walz. As we head down the pipeline to Election Day, we are officially 3 weeks out from Election Day on November 8th. You can check out tonight's debate. It's going to be from 7 to 8, both on KTTC and Fox 47, as well as on the KTTC.com live stream. And then, as always, we will be back here again from 8 to 9 here on KTTC News Now, breaking down the action of what you just saw and what you just heard from both Dr. Jensen and Governor Tim Walz. So make sure you tune into that if you want some post-game analysis, per se. But first, we got a preview of tonight's debates, and Dr. Eric Shoars again is joining me. Talk a little bit about, give us a little bit about your backgrounds first before we dive really into previewing the debate.
Been in broadcast media for about 40 years and a political analyst for 10, and a PhD in organizational management and leadership. And, you know, one of the things that's fascinating about politics is not just, you know, the whys, or I'm sorry, not just the whats, but the whys behind the whats. It's that human behavior aspect, not only about the politicians, but the voters in general, that is really fascinating about the election process. Yeah,
absolutely. You're probably like me, where you want to see the data, like you said, especially the voter behavior of, you know, I remember 2 years ago I did a piece on, the AP had, you know, all these stats on, you know, how different groups of people voted and different things like that. So it's always fascinating just to see, you know, like you said, the behavior behind it.
Well, and as with most things, there's speculation and predictions both by media and pollsters as to, you know, how people will vote, how the election will turn out. You know, for example, you know, a midterm for a president, he tends to lose seats in Congress. That's a norm. Will that be the case this year? But this is one of the most interesting elections I can think of during my lifetime, because there's so many layers to it. You think of the economy, you think of COVID, you think of all the things related to COVID societally that have affected us. You think of crime. You think of now a recession, either here or looming, depending which side you talk to.
Right.
There's just so many layers that are going to factor into voters' choices. I think this is probably one of the most unpredictable elections that we've seen in many years.
Yeah, I can certainly see that as well. And, you know, speaking of that unpredictability, what exactly are you kind of expecting tonight between these two men? This is only the second time that they're going to meet out of three before the actual election day.
I think what you're going to see is more of the same insofar as how the parties and how opponents attack each other. You know, they're both going to be extreme. They're going to both be wrong for Minnesota, all of the buzzwords that we hear. But I think there's also going to be a lot of talk of policy. You know, there's a lot that Dr. Jensen has to go on the governor's policies. There's a lot that the governor has to go on political stances and lack of experience as far as Dr. Jensen goes. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. What's going to be interesting to really see is, do they take the gloves off or do they play it safe? You know, one of the things about a debate that makes it so unique is that the candidates are unfiltered. You know, if either candidate's at a campaign stop and the media is covering it, the media can't air the entire thing. They're pulling sound bites.
Right.
Here's an unfiltered, unvarnished look at the candidates, and that can be good, but if you make a mistake, it can be very bad, especially this close to Election Day.
Absolutely, and one of the things, you know, about tonight's debate is it won't be in front of a crowd. The first one was at Farm Fest. But being behind that closed doors, do you think that, you know, that might sway them either way? Because, I mean, part two of that question would be for Jensen, you know, this is only, you know, his second of three cracks at this thing. For Walz, I mean, you would think that, or do you think, I guess, that he would come out swinging, you know, for the fences?
I think Dr. Jensen has to come out swinging for the fences because it's 3 weeks to Election Day and he's still trailing significantly in the polls. 5% to 10%, depending on which poll that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. I think for the governor, he is going to be more statesman-like, playing it safe, not swinging for the fences because he doesn't have to. He can make the policy or show what policies he's going to enact to help Minnesota in the next 4 years. He can talk about his record. He doesn't really have to be concerned about making up ground. He just has to be concerned about not losing any.
Right, right, for sure. And do you think, even if they do play it safe, I'm sure there's going to be some hostility between these two?
Oh, I would think so. I mean, any election is contentious, and if you look at our current climate in America,
yeah,
there's a lot of vitriol just among human beings who aren't running for political office. I think there's always going to be that that foundation, if you will, there. But I think when you have a controlled environment like we'll have tonight on KTTC and Fox 47, that you're going to have media journalists asking reasoned questions. You're not going to have crowds that'll boo or cheer. So for the candidates, it'll be a little bit easier to debate. It'll be a little bit easier to engage. But I think at the same time, it's going to provide for some fireworks, because I think with Dr. Jensen presumably being more aggressive, he's going to try to draw the governor out, maybe get him to be more emotional in his responses, maybe perhaps make a mistake during the debate tonight.
Yeah, that could definitely be something like you mentioned. It seems like that, is what he tried to do at least, but I'm sure the crowd obviously helped a little bit at Farm Fest too, because the governor did get very passionate about some of his responses there at least, so it could be a good tactic for him to use tonight.
And sometimes passion isn't a bad thing.
Right.
No. When you show that you care about something very deeply, that's what voters are looking for. It's the old adage, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think there's a lot of people in Minnesota and across the country that are hurting in whatever aspect of their lives, whether it's financial, health, otherwise. They want somebody in St. Paul that cares about them, even though they may never have met them, but cares about their issue, and what are they going to do about it to help me? And I think and like I say, this is a fascinating election because there's so many aspects and layers to it that people are looking for leadership.
Yeah, it certainly is. There's a lot of layers to this onion. And, we'll start with Jensen. You mentioned some of the things, obviously that are on a lot of people's minds. The economy, COVID obviously threw everything off. Abortion's another big topic. What do you think, I guess, for Jensen, if he has an opening statement or where he's going to really attack Walz? Do you think it's going to be the lack of the debates, or at this point, do you think it's going to be more policy shifted?
I don't think he's really going to, in my opinion, care about how many debates there have been as a talking point on a debate. He's behind 3 weeks to go. He's got to make his push, his case as to why he's the best choice for governor of Minnesota to unseat the incumbent. And typically in an election, especially off year like this, where the president isn't on the ballot, it's economy and it's safety. And I think that's where he's really going to come out swinging against the governor, are the governor's policies, and as Dr. Jensen would say, failed policies as it relates to the economy, as it relates to safety, i.e. crime, as it relates to his education. I think education is going to be a big topic of discussion tonight. We're finding in Minnesota that test scores are lower than they were pre-pandemic. What are we going to do about that? What are each candidate's stances and policies that they want to enact moving forward to get higher test scores and such from students? So I think it's largely going to be a substantive debate, but as with any debate, you'll have the politicians kind of get their dig every place that they can. Right,
yeah, absolutely. And, switching to Walz, when he's attacking Jensen, I know you mentioned, Jensen's lack of experience, maybe some things that he's released, but another big talking point, at least it seems to be, all about abortion.
Yes.
Is that something that you could see him mainly focusing on, or is it going to be kind of a mix of, everything I just listed?
Oh, I think that's absolutely going to be a focus. And it's amazing to me. There's two things that in my lifetime I never thought I would see change. And that's the Second Amendment and the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. Both sides scaremonger and raise a lot of money on those issues. And I never thought I'd see the day where either one or both of those would be changed. And now here we are. And I think if there's a time in the debate tonight that you will see it be the most emotionally charged, it will be on that topic. And that adds that layer where if we're talking only about the economy and security, I can see Dr. Jensen making some very serious inroads on those issues. But when we factor in abortion into this election cycle, that is such an important issue for so many people, right, that it may sway some who might be a little bit wavering as far as the economy and security issue, but abortion may be their number one. That, I think, is where the governor is going to paint Dr. Jensen as extreme, out of touch, not a wise choice to be the governor of Minnesota.
Right, and it seems like, especially kind of like you mentioned, abortion might emotionally charged, but also very polarizing, where it feels like everybody has an opinion. You're either this or you're that, especially for that one. So, yeah, definitely going to be probably the most heated, I would say.
And I think in that regard, if we can take the emotion out of the issue for a moment, the positive of that is that the founders wanted a committed constituency. You know, it's a government by the people, for the people.
Right.
So when we have such passionate engagement by the voters on these issues, that's really what this process is all about, because we're electing the people to represent us, because we don't live in a democracy. We live in a representative republic, meaning we vote for those who we want to vote the way we want to on certain issues. So one of the positive unintended consequences is we have a very engaged electorate on both sides of the aisle. And where I think, as most elections do, a lot of the elections are going to come down to the people in the middle, the independents.
Yep.
And which candidate tonight not only makes the appeal to people in their own parties, but also to independents. And I think we're going to see the independents, where they fall, will decide the governor's race.
Do you think, you know, diverging off the debate for a quick second, do you think that this is going to be one of the highest turnouts for a midterm probably in a little while?
I think so, and I think that's largely going to be driven by the abortion debate.
Yep.
I really do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So one of the other things, you know, as we're gearing up here, I mean, like you said, we're only got 3 weeks. Ads are now pouring in. They're really, and some of these ads are really taking off the gloves. Like you said, they're going, you know, bare knuckles at these things. But it seems like the parties really are going in two separate directions and maybe trying to polarize things. With the Democrats, they're saying, you know, Jensen's too extreme. He wants to ban abortion. You know, he has no experience. For the Republicans, they're saying, well, Walz is soft on crime. You know, look at the economy with the inflation, stuff like that. You know, are you really better off? He's too extreme. Is that, you know, do you think, kind of like what you said, I guess the independents really are going to settle this just with how polarizing this has got? I mean, like you said, this is about as polarizing as it has gotten in a long time.
Even with as much attention as the abortion issue has gotten, most people don't make up their minds about who they're going to vote for until about roughly 90 days before an election. Mm-hmm. So the last 3 weeks, you're going to have the most number of engaged voters, because people are looking at the calendar thinking, well, I'm going to have to vote here in a few weeks. I better start finding out who these people are, what they're for, et cetera. And that's where you see a lot of negative advertising, because you may not like me, but boy, that's Zach Fuller. He's too extreme for Minnesota. He's out of touch. He's a Pelosi puppet. He's a, you know, right-wing nut. You'll see that negative come out, because it might be, well, you may not like me, but the other guy's worse. And right. That, unfortunately, for politics is nothing new. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other big topics that, you know, we talked a little bit about the economy, but the other thing is that Minnesota is sitting on, you know, a multi-billion-dollar surplus. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's where, you know, the Republicans and the Democrats that came together in the legislative session for the state, they got the tax bill done. However, they couldn't agree on anything else. The Democrats said, well, we're not moving forward with this. And, you know, Democrats wanted this, Republicans wanted this, and Walz had, you know, he was like, well, I'll give you $2,000 in checks. You know, how big of a topic do you think that that could potentially be tonight? Or do you think that, especially for Jensen, if he's going to attack Walz, it's going to be more so just driven on inflation and the fact that people are struggling to afford things? I think you're going to see a mix, quite honestly, because when we talk about a surplus, how do you view that surplus? You know, the Democratic Party and the governor wanted to spend that money, as in, hey, look at all this free money that we have. The Republicans on the other side were saying, hey, we need to give that back because we overcharged people on their taxes. So where they couldn't disagree is, or where they couldn't agree is, well, where do we come in on that issue? And should it be in checks? Should it be in property tax relief? Should we spend it on education, on infrastructure? You know, you can make a case both sides on what to do with that money, and unfortunately, both sides couldn't come together on one agreement. And I think that's going to be, as it pertains to the Minnesota economy, it's not just going to be about inflation and how much more it takes for us to live, but if you could have come to an agreement and showed some leadership in St. Paul, Governor Walz, pretending to be Dr. Jensen, mm-hmm. people would have $2,000 more in their pockets or whatever the case may be. And so I think when we talk about the economy, it's just not going to be about the overall aspects of inflation and such. It's going to be on some very important issues related to the surplus and how it's best spent, and not being able to come in agreement on how to best use it for the state of Minnesota. Right, and one of the newer things that just came out, and you know, we can play this from Governor Walz's perspective, because this is really going to be the first time that he's kind of had an open mic where he's going to be challenged and asked about it, is the Feeding Our Future fraud case that just happened, the $250 million. You know, if you're him,
I mean, he's going to have to ward off probably attack after attack from Jensen, but also he's going to have to, I'd assume our panel was going to ask about this because, I mean, there was, I think, 6 people from Rochester that were charged in this thing all over the states. You know, what do you think his mindset would be as when it regards that?
Well, I think from Governor Walz's perspective, you're going to see somebody who's saying, yes, the buck needs to stop here, mistakes were made, but we were living in such an unprecedented time, to use the term. Mistakes were bound to happen, and now they're trying to get those cleaned up. And you could reasonably say that's not a bad argument, because we've never lived through times like that before, where there was uncertainty every day, and you're just saying, well, apply for this fund of money. People applied for the fund of money. Unfortunately, some were fraudulent. But at the same time, leaders must be held accountable. And so I think that's going to, again, play a part in who's best to lead the state of Minnesota going forward. And I would expect Dr. Jensen to use that as part of this case, because it's an important issue. It's just who ultimately gets the accountability for that. Is it somebody in Washington, D.C.? Is it somebody in St. Paul? Is it somebody closer to home? And that's part of what the voters will be deciding as well.
Right. Anything, any other thoughts or anything dealing with the debate tonight, or what we can expect or anything?
No, I'm just excited that it's here. We so rarely get to see the candidates unfiltered. It's through controlled conditions and sound bites and press releases. To have the candidates here one-on-one, being asked questions by the media, and having our viewers being able to see those candidates interact and respond live, I think is just a tremendous opportunity. Yeah,
absolutely. It'll be an interesting night. A lot of fireworks, like you said. It'll be 4 panelists, one from each of the stations, so it's going to be played all around the state of Minnesota. It'll be up in the Duluth market, over in the Fargo market, Mankato, and then here, obviously, in the Rochester market, we'll have it with Gray Television. And it'll be one anchor from each of those stations. Our Caitlin Alexander will be KTTC's representative on the panel, and they'll have an hour to duke it out, per se. So it'll be interesting. I guess I did think of one other thing. You know, one of the things is that it's not going to be widely accessible in the Twin Cities. Do you think that is potentially an issue, per se? I don't want to say, you know, I don't want to say it's an issue, but you know, Twin Cities folks, they're going to have to, if they really want to watch it, it's not going to be on their airwaves.
So I think there's potentially 2 things in how you interpret that. Right. One, this is his district. When he served in Congress, it was the 1st district, and largely the stations that the debate will be on are within the 1st district. The other thing that you could say about not being in the Twin Cities market is, does the governor, again, perhaps playing it safe, not talk to the Twin Cities because he's more concerned about getting votes in greater Minnesota, feeling maybe he has things locked up, if you will, in the Twin Cities metro area, that doing a debate there is more risk than it is reward, whereas here it's more reward than it is risk.
Right, and you know, the other caveat to that is that, kind of like what you mentioned, the greater Minnesota, but also questions about greater Minnesota that aren't necessarily just so focused on the Twin Cities area.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Eric, thank you very much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your insights and all your knowledge, and definitely going to be a fun preview. Well, it was a fun preview, but definitely going to be a fun night tonight on KTTC and Fox 47.
Thanks, Zach. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll jump right to this. So speaking of Election Day, Iowa is starting its absentee voting tomorrow. So if you filed for a mail-in ballot, or if you want to absentee vote in person, that begins tomorrow. I spoke with Secretary of State Paul Pate about that, and here is my conversation with him. Let me pull this up here.